Okay, well, Karim, thanks for making time to do this. You've got more things on your plate than dictates that you can make time to just have conversations with Sage and our broader community. But thanks for doing so in any case.
Yeah, no, real pleasure to be here.
Little word of context for the people who will be listening in on this, and Karim, for you too. This is the first in a series that we're going to do around the very slippery word coaching. That word seems to mean all kinds of things to all kinds of people, and when you change the context, all the definitions change again. But it's awesome to be starting with you, and I think we set out that let's have about an hour conversation, all centered around the things that you and your co-author wrote in 4 Greatest Coaching Conversations. Subtitle: Change mindsets, shift attitudes, and achieve extraordinary results. So if that's fine with you, let's do that.
Yeah, beautiful.
Okay,
yeah,
super.
Looking forward to the call.
You're not a coaching guy by origin. You're actually a math guy.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, an interesting connection as well, because my origins were I did a maths degree, I did a master's, and it's not on there because I didn't complete it, but I went through a PhD with a bank for about a year and a half before a massive transition of personal change and connecting it to mindset. There was a huge mindset shift that happened during that time where I moved into the whole realm of human development, personal development. But yeah, so maths has been my background. But the beauty of having that background in coaching is that, I don't take things for the fluffy parts very well. Like if it gets a bit too fluffy for me, I that part of me kicks in that says, hey, we need to have a bit of evidence, need a bit of theory behind it. So it serves me in good stead to have that in this profession, which has a lot of potential, sometimes a little bit too much, goes a bit too far into the kind of fluffy space. And how do we come back to keeping it true? And so that math background really helps with that.
When our team was reading about your bio, we were thinking it'd be interesting to have like a time lapse sped video on your bookshelf. Would have gone from all these math textbooks to psychology to corporate culture and leadership and so on. So what dominates the bookshelf these days, Karim?
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I mean, if you look behind, because that range actually is time bound. So I wrote some maths books. I wrote about 8 or 9 maths books. So they start on the far right. Then there's a lot of maths books that I've used, and a lot of amazing maths people. So Bertrand Russell's maths. So Bertrand Russell was a philosopher as much as a mathematician, but he understood reality using maths. So you've got that overlap of maths with what's life all about. And as you progress, you'll see psychology, psychotherapy, and then leadership development. So what I love right now is people like, if I'm going to recommend books at the same time, people like Ken Wilber, who are very logical, but also very profound around human change, human development, societal change. So and so connecting back to leadership, a lot of his work has been applied to leadership and then to coaching as well. So I've read a lot of people that have worked alongside Ken Wilber in the coaching profession and human change and how do you impact organization, society, and the role of coaching in supporting that as well. So yes, that range goes across there. So the latest one, you'll see some stuff on mindfulness. And the other one, if we may come across this today as we talk about it, but another area that's getting quite big in leadership development is vertical development. So you'll see quite a few books about that.
One more time, what is it?
Yeah, it's called vertical development or adult development. Very simply, and across where we go, if we go here, it could be very interesting because it's very pertinent to coaching, but it's quite advanced as well. So I'll leave us to see where it goes. But the very simple idea is that we know children go through development stages, right? And they're documented research. And there's some work that's done in Harvard University, which shows actually that development never, ever, ever stops for adults either. Each stage, if you look at child development, where a child first thinks it's the center of the world, and then it expands and thinks, oh, okay, I'm part of a group, and then it expands further, etc. You know, as you grow, that expansion continues, and coaching has a huge role to play to support development. And then what are those stages? And the work that's done at Harvard was with thousands of leaders as part of the research population. And what they showed was, what are these advanced stages and what do they look like? What's the impact on organization or growth? And how does it continue? And then how do you look out for those? And therefore, as a coach, how might you adapt your coaching depending on the person's particular area of development that they're working on? So to make it really simple, from coaching a teenager, it'd be really different from someone who's a senior executive in an organization from a maturity point of view. And so the model itself kind of helps you to go, okay, this is kind of some of the tension points that they're going to face, and how do you support them through it? So yeah, so quite a few books around that stuff as well. So very current.
Well, let's stick a red flag bookmark on that, because I want to get to it. In particular, through a question, which is sort of like, when does coaching stop? I mean, you can get a sense from your book about when it starts. Like, what are the conditions in which people, for the first time in a professional context, engage a coach? There's some there, but I think probably there's some misunderstanding, or certainly room for clarity as to when a given coaching project, if you wanted to use a word like that, is over, or say when it has officially transitioned into the next project, or when it stops cold turkey. So if we can bookmark that, I'd love to come back to that. I'm concerned that some folks will need just a little bit of map making from you and me in terms of what your book is, because I'd like a lot of people to come away from this chat saying, well, I'm going to pick the book up and read it. So B, relate, inspire, think. So you've taken what is a very broad and vague with fuzzy fence lines topic, which is professional coaching, and said, well, here's a way to stick it into, say, quadrants, or at least 4 topics. Can you, for the uninitiated, just give an intro into be, relate, inspire, think?
Yeah, beautiful. And as you said, this is kind of the first of your series on coaching. So if I go back a couple of steps and just go, right, what am I talking about with coaching here? And then
yes, please.
What's underneath be, relate, inspire, and think is this idea of mindset. So kind of share a bit of that, and then it will make a lot more sense to talk about these 4 quadrants. So for us, certainly where we started was recognizing the power of coaching in human change, and then the impact on leadership. And for us, coaching was about the power of that relationship. If I'm coaching you, how can I be truly in service to your growth? And hopefully you bring your challenge, your goals, and then through the relationship, we can support you to reach those goals, and hopefully become more, accelerate your development, your journey, and hopefully the impact that you have on your career and also on the organization. So it's about that relationship that can be quite creative, powerful, and the very simplicity of coaching is the ability to listen, ask powerful questions, to relate, and trust that you actually, inside yourself as the coachee, have the power to realize that potential that you have. So that's kind of, a common agreement around what coaching is. And then you get different types, whether it's life coaching, which is more kind of longer term, or business coaching, which might be on a particular topic. So a little bit of an overview. I think our big insight connecting to the book was, and I'll frame it up like this, was the way we perceive reality actually determines our experience. Now that sounds really wacky. So let me give you an example, a really simple one. So I've got a leader who's failed on a particular project that they're going on, right? So they have gone into this place of, that's awful, I failed, I'm not a good leader, I shouldn't be doing this. And you get quite down. That will impact your behaviors, it will impact your team if you go into your day with that. Take a few days to potentially come out of it. what we started to recognize was it wasn't the fact that something had failed out there, it was your perception of that failure that was the problem. So if you started to look at that failure from that lens, that is, I failed, this is bad, never going to get out of this, my seniors are going to look at me in a particular way from here on, that's going to then self-prophesy. So you'll kind of be down in the dumps, your productivity levels go down for sure, your energy levels are down. What we'd realized in coaching, this thing called mindset, or the way we looked at the world, and the beliefs and the feelings, if you could start to recognize, actually, I'm looking through this lens. So almost imagine, you've put on a pair of glasses and it's telling you to look at that situation from a particular point of view. If you can start to recognize, actually, I'm looking at it from this pair of glasses, what about a different pair that says, okay, I'm not going to change the fact that something went wrong, but what do I learn here? Am I truly a failure, or is it just a one-off experience that's gone wrong? So you start to see truthfully, is it really bad, or actually is this the first step? Like if you think about someone like Dyson, 5,000 failures, before the vacuum cleaner, in fact, in Asia, started to get taken seriously. So how do I learn from this and persevere? So that pair of glasses suddenly creates a whole new different experience. And what's beautiful is neuroscience is now really proving that, starting to look at the brain and starting to see, you look at the world completely differently depending on the lens that you're looking at. And this lens we call mindset. And it's not just rational thoughts, it's the interplay of the different three parts of the brain. So how you think, and, the corresponding feelings, and how that impacts your physiology. So if you are believing you failed and I've got it all wrong, heart racing, your heart starts racing, you start feeling emotionally low. Whereas when you shift to the other lens, suddenly you're looking differently. So part of then coaching with mindset, and this is where we started, was we started to coach in the early 2000s, democratizing coaching through working with the mindset of leaders. Then the behaviors would follow. Because if I'm now looking at this as, hey, what's the learning here? Or actually, I haven't personally failed, we've got something that didn't quite work out. How do we grow? Your behaviors change. You start to inspire people, you start to ask the right questions, and hopefully through the learning, you get to your goal a lot faster and impact the team and hopefully the success of the organization. We work a lot with sales teams as well. Resilience in sales, for example, the B conversation. How do I manage that setback? And actually, no, I'm just learning about how to engage. I'm learning about my skill set, and not to fall and then go down in the dumps, but build that capacity to keep learning so that you sharpen up and refine your skills. So that's the mindset. If I now go to be, relate, inspire, and think, is what we noticed through our research that we have coached, and had hundreds of thousands of coaching conversations. What coaches would do was write research notes about what was talked about in the coaching. And we confidentially themed those conversations and stepped back and said, right, what are the different areas of mindset people are talking about? And what we found over a period of years is 4 types of areas that came up globally over and over again. So 4 mindset areas that were critical for leadership success. And through recognizing those, we found what are the 4 great conversations, or the great coaching conversations that helped to shift those mindsets. So the one I gave for you as the example is the B conversation. How do I shift the lens from one that tells me I'm bad and I've got it all wrong, to a lens that says, hey, what's the truth here? What's the opportunity here? What's the growth opportunity here? And then how do I choose how to respond differently? So that's the B conversation. And we found a lot of topics like resilience, resourcefulness, being at my best, staying out of the box, these are terms you might refer to, or being confident, that the underlying mindset was this ability to shift my lens, emotionally, rationally, physiologically. And so coaching that conversation was very profound. In our coaching approach, we actually didn't do a lot of coach matching, which is rare. A lot of people want to have that right chemistry. We would just train our coaching in these conversations. train our coaches in these conversations. And we were getting amazing, extraordinary results. People were really shifting mindset and therefore behavior, impact and results. So that's the B one. Then the relate mindset was about, how do I, especially when you're in conflict or you kind of develop trust, trying to influence, there was an underlying shift in my mindset around how do I really step into the world of the other fully, and certainly again, just with our sales leaders, how do you become customer centric in an authentic way? So that conversation is about shifting the mindset toward the other person's world and therefore responding differently. So in the book, there's a lot more about that mindset and then the kind of conversations that really help shift that mindset in you. The inspire quadrant or the mindset is about how do I connect with my, as a leader, with my values and my vision when I'm trying to achieve what I want to achieve with myself or with my team. And we found that is particularly powerful when you're trying, inspirational leadership. I think there was some research done that's seen as the number one that people wanted to see in their leaders. I think it was by Kousis and Posner. They interviewed a ton of people, but to be motivating and inspiring, but also as a leader to have that kind of energy that comes with having connected to your values and your vision of what you want to create, can be a very powerful way in which you lead others. So coaching that conversation to help leaders connect with, so what are the values that make you live and breathe and wake you up in the morning, give you that sense of meaning. And it can be very transformational to a person to connect with that rather than, the rat race and I've just been doing what I know is my task in my job description. It's actually helping you to connect with your sense of purpose, meaning, what makes you tick. And then finally, the think conversation, which again, very relevant now in the world of sustainability and how we're trying to innovate. How do we create profit while caring for the planet, caring for the people in the planet? So that conversation is how do you get curious about what those shifts are going on, in the marketplace, around where customers are going, around where the world is going, and start to think about the products or the direction you need to take. So the mindset shift there is about that curiosity, and then the conversation itself is how do you practically start to think about stepping back and having a breakthrough thinking conversation. So those are the four areas, and then the conversations, or the four mindsets and the conversations that support them. And anyone that does want to buy the book, I'd reckon don't buy it just to read it. It's got lots of practical examples of coaches that we've coached, and it's built around a lot of questions and exercises that you can go through, because if you go through them yourself, then you can really support others. So whether you want to be coached through the book or use it as a tool for coaching others, definitely hold it as a workbook as much as some theory and insight around our research as well. But yeah, broad overview of those four areas.
Yeah. Well, within those four, there's obviously a massive territory covered, but it was interesting to hear you just now describe the research process, like 100,000 conversations. And we know that, just because I've spoken to people who've done this and done a bit myself, that there would have been a lot more than 100,000 if that's what you ended up being able to use. So maybe a couple of words on BTS so people could get their head around how do you get 100,000 copy notes from what ideally is probably a totally confidential conversation. So just mechanically, can you just explain where that comes from? Because I think that's quite informative and interesting when people look at how did this guy come up with 4 themes? So a couple words on that.
So BTS, so quick couple of angles on this. So one is the data set were pulled from the research notes that we have online. They were pulled into an Excel sheet, so getting really nitty-gritty around it. So yes, massive file. So there were 3 ways we got to those 4 areas. One was internal kind of reading of the data. So we went through it, and it was more informal, so to go, oh, what are the themes? These are the themes we're seeing. And then we narrowed it down with Singapore Management University. So what we did with Singapore Management University was they took a subset of those conversations. So we did a random selection of those conversations and then mapped it to be relate inspiring things. So that was the more kind of scientific, and we've got some papers out there on, you know, the process and how we get the research done. But for simple terms, took that Excel sheet, they started to analyze. We had a researcher that literally went through a subset and started to map it to, is that a B, is that a relate, or is that another, you know, something we haven't noticed that. There was a very small, you know, almost insignificant number that we couldn't identify. And often it was because the notes themselves were just not clear, as opposed to it was another mindset area. So that's what we did with Singapore Management University. And then the third thing we did to corroborate the research was we looked at all like the top 6 or 7 thought leaders in the world of human development and asked the question, what areas are they saying are the critical areas for leadership? And found some of them were talking about 2 out of the 4 areas. A Harvard Gardner, the guy who wrote about different types of intelligence, or you have Dan Goldman, emotional intelligence. They would talk about 2 or 3 areas. Another one would talk about all 4. And so we start to map, is what we're saying, corroborated by the thought leaders. We've done a lot of research out there, and we found, yeah, no one's saying there's more areas. They're kind of all in those 4 areas, and we made the mapping, and that is in the book. So if you want to look at that mapping to thought leaders, that's in there. So we went several angles to get to that clarity of those 4 areas.
No, I know some of our, we'll just call them sort of like community, right? Because these are like clients, the clients as individuals, clients as organizations, people who used to be clients, people who are faculty, authors like yourself and so forth. So it's a mishmash of different people, but a lot of them are research nerds. So they'll be quite keen to click in a couple layers into how you went about this. And I think that's quite fascinating. One of the things that came up in a conversation with a gentleman named Matt Dixon recently was that he did a huge data crunch to write a book called Challenge Your Sale, which is very popular. And we had a chat with him about it. But he has been able very recently to pull a whole separate set of data, because prior to COVID and the spike in popularity of conversations in the format that you and I are speaking now, all the best and most lucrative and most sensitive sales conversations were not recorded in any way at all. And you'd have much more transactional and lower grade conversations happening that are being recorded. And so you're kind of missing this rich seam of great data, because it's like all the high end interesting conversations are totally, you know, they're lost to posterity. But you guys are capturing what ultimately is a very intimate and private conversation, but redacting names and sort of cleansing it in that way. And for the purpose of your book, who cares? No, the last thing you need or want is anybody's name or context or business name.
Exactly.
To pull out the themes. So I think it's a very fascinating source, like, you know, original resource to draw from.
Yeah, it is. It is, and it continues, Kevin, because, you know, there's AI now that we've got to read and interpret data. So we've got, you know, at BTS right now, we are using AI engines to start looking at every single one of those, you know, probably on to now 300,000 conversations, you know, the last 10 years, if we had to do it all up. So, you know, we would use AI to now start reading that data and then hopefully producing even better insights by programming it with how we do it already, and then how the machine learning can improve on the way we do it to get better insights. And then holding that, and then GDPR, you know, the data protection in Europe is probably high regulation, so that keeps us honest. So we are keeping the confidentiality and making sure we're asking for the right permissions from coaches, so that they know we're theming up data, but we're anonymizing it for, you know, all of that. So we need to hold that alongside the possibility of some juicy potential here. So we're going to continuing to do that with the opportunities we've got.
So BTS is what's the total geographical footprint? Are you guys just in Europe?
No, so it's global. We've got offices in every region, and we've broken into 3 main areas. So we've got Europe, and then there's North America, which covers Canada, North America, and then you've got most of the world, which is effectively everything else. But we've got offices in Singapore, in Hong Kong, all the way through to Latin America, which becomes part of most of the world. So yeah, so we've got three main big regions, and then within them there's a number of offices across that region. So in Europe, for example, 5 offices across Europe, 5 or 6, depending on how we look at it. And then in the North America region, there's a number of offices, and I'm not going to try and guess how many there are, but across San Francisco, New York, Chicago, etc. They're all the main cities. So yeah, it's a global company that works mainly with FTSE 200 to 500 companies, which is great opportunity. So we get to work with some great leaders, and and BTS's work isn't coaching. So coaching is one of the practices within BTS, but BTS more broadly works in change and transformation, leadership development, sales and marketing. Those are kind of our 3 big areas. And our roots are in creating business simulations. So how do we support leaders to make strategic changes through simulating the business in the way we want to see it in its new ways of working? So that's a very simple way of describing it, but it's about making strategy personal. And coaching is one of the very powerful ways in which you can make that strategy personal. So, if you're doing something like customer centricity as a culture change, yes, you can do great workshops and everyone goes on the best ways of being customer centric, but every individual's challenge with that strategy is going to be different. And if you can help them shift the mindset around their personal challenge, whilst leveraging the strengths that, again, everyone will have their unique strengths around customer centricity. If every individual is working on the development area and the strength to leverage, as a collective, then everyone's moving towards that strategy. And so the workshops that we do, or the business simulations, or the assessments, or whatever it is that we do, are supported by coaching to make those changes happen personally, alongside the collective impact that we'd like to have as well.
Very cool. Very, very interesting. No, but it's also, I think, kind of inspiring that as a business, you've been able to take something that has so classically a chemistry quality, like you mentioned. It's like, sort of picking your life mentor or something. It's like, well, how were you supposed to roll through a directory, right? Is this Tinder for coaching? Like, how does this work? And yet you've been able to say, no, there's sort of harder professional rules on one side of this craft, where it's not going to matter much who the pairing is, so long as the coach has a, what would you say, kind of a methodical and deliberate approach by which they're going to do their craft.
Yeah, and the other bit that links to that is we also do our own screening before the coach joins us. So, as a minimum, they've got their accreditation with a professional body, or training with a professional body. And also we listen to them coach, so that's part of it. I would say, that capacity to relate to a human being, to be able to, be a great coach, with some of the skills we believe make coaches great. And we do that due diligence in advance as well. So it saves the headache for someone to run through this kind of Tinder list of coaches and then decide. So we do a lot of that. And then, as you say, then we train them in the craft of mindset change and the science of it, and how do you support people to shift that. And when we've done all of those bits, we found, like, we've had, I believe, 8 changes out of the tens of thousands of leaders we've coached. And we've not done any chemistry sessions for those. It's been a straight, we know this is a good coach and they can do mindset shift work against the goal that you're working on. And people like the coaching, we get great feedback scores. So yes, it does. So hopefully we've kind of refined that process to help coaching be great.
Yeah, you're talking yourself down, but it's not hopefully. That's a tough thing to achieve, what you're describing. Yeah, I have some reason to be able to say so with confidence. That's a tough thing to achieve. So well done.
Thank you.
Yeah. When before we go, I want people to be able to track down not only your book and yourself, but BTS too, because they could find it useful. It's interesting you mentioned Singapore, because that's where I have been based for 16 years. So Singapore management, you did the did some of the heavy lifting on the paper writing and so on, did they?
Yes,
Great.
that's right. They did the paper writing for us. So yeah, we commissioned them and then partnered with them through the research process and helped them to read our Excel sheets, etc.
I bet they loved it. I bet they loved it. Well, maybe there was probably a couple of undergrads who were stuck up late at night, like just distinguishing one keyword from another and some like bad transcripts or something. But with leaving those guys aside, they probably loved the project. I bet it was a really cool one.
Definitely, yeah. We love doing it with them, and absolutely, this is right up their street around cutting edge research for them around management leadership. So yes, and we had the I think it was the PhD students that was doing the late night, burning the midnight oil type thing. Although in Singapore you wouldn't do that, too hot for that. But yeah, and then there was a senior supervisor looking over the project. That's our key contact. So yeah, great fun to do the project.
I didn't do official proper data analysis on this, but the word resilience I know comes up a lot in your book. And what's remarkable about that, I would have expected that to have been because you produced and published it in like late 21 or 22 or something like that. But this came out in 19 and prophetically was talking about the significance and the importance of resilience in, what obviously it's not like before 2019, there was no times of trials, but COVID was a pretty special season for that. You must have had a real I told you so moment thinking about what you were writing, you guys were writing around resilience, and then watching what happened in the subsequent years.
Yeah, we did, Kevin. And, interestingly, we just did this talk at the Corporate Research Forum here in the UK, another kind of research institute that worked with organizations. And what we noticed was, people have been asking us, what have we noticed change through COVID around leadership development, and certainly through our insights and coaching. And what we found was all four areas got accelerated through COVID, as opposed to there was a new area that came up through COVID. So there definitely a told you so moment potentially across all of those areas. And people will recognize it. So the resilience one, as you say, is really clear one, people disrupted and much more uncertainty, unpredictability. Now you've got the Ukraine impact as well, so continued disruption. And the bit I'd add to that, as people listening to this, in context, they also feel relatively small, as massive as they were. Because if you look at something even like AI technology, in the next 5 years, that's going to be a massive disruption. To be able to send a bot into your brain and kill cancer cells through just data and insight. You take that, or you take cryptocurrency and the global markets that are going to shift. So disruption and then being able to be resilient in that is going to be even bigger. So there's hopefully prevention of another I told you so moment. It'll be, let's start looking at how do we lead through those uncertainties and find the resilience. But relate people working virtually, how do we build relationship and the importance of that so that people don't feel isolated and alone. And certainly, being able to support leaders to engage in that connection during those times of separation, that was really critical during COVID. The innovation one, I think, that's what the clients that we worked with that succeeded through COVID were the ones that adapted and innovated, moved virtually quickly, listened to the customer, market shifting really quickly. They were buying online, they were buying different types of product. And those who shifted and tried to listen fast and innovate quickly, they're the ones that succeeded through COVID, apart from the ones that had to naturally shut down for that period. But those that were able to work, the adaptability and the innovation was a big part of that, which is what the think conversation. And of course, the inspire one, if you're working from home and now you're not meeting your mates and colleagues and seeing your line manager, to inspire you or to drive your day-to-day duties and responsibilities, you have to find that motivation from within. So what is it that drives you? And equally for leaders, how do I inspire my staff, now that they're virtual and disconnected from the physical connection to people? So how, and again, we found organizations that had those monthly updates with the CEO or senior executive leaders, and hearing about what the plan is, what are we doing, making it okay, and inspiring people that, we can make this if we all corral. They're the ones that had, again, more success in the way, and this is not research-based view. This is what I've observed. Those, and I've certainly experienced it in our own company. We used to have monthly updates from our CEO, who would give us the plan, let us know how it's going, some of the values that they were holding, and that just kept me going. So it was like, okay, we can do this. We can make it through this period. So you could feel that. So yeah, so all 4 conversations I felt were really critical that we saw during COVID, and that's what we were sharing in the research forum, that rather than anything new, they just became more important. Hopefully we're onto something there.
I want to ask you a couple of the sort of mechanical aspects of how coaching works, because a lot of folks will read your book or listen to this, and they won't take a nice big generous wallet and march down to BTS and say like, all right, coaching, we're into it, set us up. Instead, they're going to not just try, they're going to have to go and implement some of this themselves. They're going to have to try coaching on for the first time, and they will not be accredited from a coaching organization and have gone through like all the practice rounds and the degrees and the feedback and everything. So that's the, I think, end readership and the destination that a lot of this goes to. So I want to go there, but before that, there's another term that when you said just now mentioned working at home, it came back up to mind, which is self-talk. This is such a like straightforward, but I think quite powerful idea. It has that quality of other great ideas, which is that it's simple on the one hand, but quite far-reaching on the other hand. Can you say a few words, please, about self-talk?
Yeah, definitely. And and it probably kind of links to the first question of the two, which is, on a very simple level, everyone can start to recognize self-talk, and I'll share a little bit more about it in a sec. But if you're going to work with someone professionally, to have that training and capability, to meet the different types of self-talk you can get, requires time and practice, and hopefully some professional support, or have a professional coach. But coming to the point about self-talk, a nice way into this is if everyone who's listening thinks about a crisis moment or a difficult moment, or what we call a trigger moment in the last few days, few weeks. It could, I've shared a couple of business examples, but I had one with my daughter this morning, which is not wanting to get out to school this morning. And in my mind, I'm thinking she's being a brat, she's being a pain in the backside, and not at my best as a father. That self-talk, if I've not noticed it, can be impactful, on how I behave. So I could start probably going, hey, I'm going to start giving you consequences. My kind of compassion goes. So the self-talk is the voice in your head, and when you're triggered, it's like a radio. And when you're triggered, a particular channel turns on, and that if you look at it when it's triggered, the connection to the brain is it often connects to the primitive brain, which is very black and white. She is bad, she is being difficult, or back to my earlier example, I have failed, I'm a bad person, or I'm not good enough. And those self-talk voices can be very debilitating if you believe them, and impact your leadership, and absolutely impact productivity in organizations. And some of the stats in the book show can have billion-dollar impacts around stress. And one of the big, if you work with depression, stress, anxiety, some of the most successful techniques start with, let's look at your self-talk. Depression, self-talk tends to be, I'm useless and worthless. But everyone suffers from that a little bit. Depression is just prolonged. So yeah, I won't go on about the whole psychology of self-talk, but one other thing that's worth noticing about self-talk, it can either be quite damning about your future, like I'm going to get fired, or things are going to go really bad here, or they're judgmental about what's happened. This is wrong, that person's wrong, I've really messed this up. And if you get caught by it, you're in a bit of trouble. And that's where coaching can really help to go, hey, this is a set of beliefs. Is it true that you've really failed here? It's a one-off project. Let's get some reality. And so we shift the self-talk to start thinking what's truthful. And we're trying to stop us from using that primitive brain as the way in which we look at that experience. And hopefully through getting a bit of space, having a chance to talk about it, express some of the frustration feelings that can come up, we could get a bit of space from that self-talk and hopefully start to shift it towards something that's more realistic, accesses your cognitive brain, relaxes the mind, and suddenly you start to see, okay, calm down, take a moment. And often with hindsight, 6 months later, a year later, we get to that place a week later. But if you can do it in the moment, it's very powerful, because those moments can be very critical in business decisions, especially now with the pace. So if we can catch, I'm in my self-talk with this leader right now, and I'm about to berate him or her for what's happened. I'm doing that thing again. Let me just pause. What's the truth here? Actually, let's find out what's going on. So if you can do that more and more in the moment with practice, to shift that self-talk can be very powerful. So yeah.
So the two examples you just used now sort of implied that the self-talk is negative. You must have seen situations where the self-talk is wrong on the positive side too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Just the leaders or sales people or what have you, and they're just high-fiving themselves after every call, or they're telling themselves that they're inspirational and full of gravitas, and that's a different self-talk that needs to be corrected, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the word we use for the healthy self-talk is the truthful self-talk, as opposed to positive self-talk, which could be just as unhelpful or not truthful in the moment. So so if you've got grandiose self-talk, that can be just debilitating, because you just annoy people around you with it, because people see through it, they're not inspired by it. So and I've worked with leaders who've got that kind of distorted perception of themselves, and interestingly often driven by a negative self-talk that they're not saying out loud, which, so deep down is an insecurity, and then they compensate with, hey, everything's great, and look how well I did there. And actually, with the safety of a coaching conversation, you can go, why do you need to keep showing what you've done well? Why do you need to keep exaggerating that experience, or pretending it's not, that wasn't the news it was? And then what will drop out is the underlying kind of belief or insecurity. And then you can go, let's come to the truth here, and suddenly you're shifting into a more realistic place.
Well, again, you wrote this in 19, or you published it in 19. And boy, when I was looking at that, just the basic dynamics of self-talk you were referencing in your manuscript there, I thought, I have seen so many individual cases that I know where the self-talk it just went on like a parabolic, shot into the stratosphere, because there was nobody else to even casually at the water cooler or at the beers after work or anything come along, not as a proper coach, but just to say hey, you're not as hot as you think you are, or hey, you're not so tragic as you think you are. And the voice, a lot of people were stuck in their own heads in a really physical, mechanical way that they hadn't been before, and it showed. It I don't think it's too much of a reach to say what's been called the Great Resignation has a lot to do with people talking them absolutely into a ball of knots.
Totally.
For good or for bad or otherwise.
Exactly. I mean, stuckness, a ball of knots, the parabola, that goes on, exponentially even to the stratosphere. So that's what happens when you're stuck in that loop. We know it, and you can ruminate in it. And as I said, in the extremes, it can lead to anxiety, depression if you don't catch it quickly enough. So it can be very risky to stay there. And therefore, as you say, by the water cooler, and that's, links back to your earlier first question of the two, around coaching professional versus coaching, by the water cooler. The hope of the book was, can we start to help leaders to have that water cooler conversation, to go, hey, I'm hearing some self-talk here, and how do I expose it and say, I'm hearing you being quite damning and very judgmental. So you can start some very simple interventions. And to be a professional coach, when someone's really stuck in it, it requires experience and skill, because you can't push someone through to the mindset change. That there is the art of listening and the art of really meeting the human being and creating the psychological safety for people to shift. I mean, if I go back to my daughter's example, if I say to her this morning, so you don't want to go to school, come on, let's have a fun day at school, she's going to kick back at me 10 times harder. And I've got a very strong daughter. The moment I try and push her into a different mindset, she will backfire, So what, in terms of professional training, what you do is you learn to go, hey, I'm hearing you're really upset here, you're angry. And eventually when she starts to feel safe and opens up, turns out this morning, she's upset because one of her friends didn't talk to her very nicely on Friday and she doesn't want to go to school. Now we got to the real mindset. It's like she's feeling a bit insecure and alone. And that's what a professional coach can do, is to go from, I'm not going to treat you superficially here. I'm going to help you to uncover the layers here so that you can genuinely shift. Otherwise, you can be participating in the stuckness if you try and push it. People, you have that debate, and many of us have had it even in our own mind, that you're trying to be the other perspective, to say, hey, it's not that bad, and the person entrenches in, you don't understand, it really is. If you can slow down and say, hey, let me hear why it's so bad, and we can expose the current mindset, then you can shift it. And that's what, that's what a professional coach might do, is to understand the art and the science of it. And, as you say, just have that water cooler moment with a line manager who goes, I get it, and I hear you're exaggerating here, and what's it like to have that, you can start to intervene. And there's some real good tips here from professional coaches on, how do you support stuckness and how do you support people to shift. So it's getting that balance right. And we sometimes talk about coaching skills versus coaching as a way of being. And I think coaching as a way of being comes from practice, it comes from experience, it comes from professional training. Coaching skills, you can practice from tomorrow, you've read a book, and it takes time to make it a good way of being. Similar with sales, you can learn a few tips, but until you go out there and you have that grasp and you have those tough experiences and you learn, then you can call yourself a true salesperson or sales leader. So similarly here with coaching.
Yeah, I mean, one of the beautiful things I think for say a young manager is that in the course of ordinary work, she might have 20 opportunities a week, right? So it's you're not left with no practice, and hopefully those aren't sensational big tidal waves of opportunities, because that probably is a little more than you can handle if you've only read the first chapter of Karim's book or something. But there's no shortage of place to just pull out your fresh tools and try them out.
Absolutely. And the thing I'd build on that, Kevin, is start with yourself. I know it's the classic thing that everyone says, but practice the self-talk awareness yourself. There's a process there to help you to shift your state. The more you understand your own psyche and how it operates, and and how to shift, you become much better at supporting another. And all of that. So we've written the book in two ways. One is, how do you experience each of those tools for yourself? And then what are some great ways you can apply the same tool to others? What are the questions you could ask? And I think it's the dance of both. And as you said, you get focused for yourself 20 times a week, you get it, in your environment through others. So there's plenty of opportunity. And the other bit I'd add is then the reflection, what is it that went well there? What didn't work? And so you're constantly building your muscle of experience and learning.
Yeah. Wow. Any final thoughts for who I was sort of speculating the reader is, in my experience, and just so for additional context for you, Karim, Sage builds academies for organizations that are usually too small to have one, but ambitious enough that they want one. So we'll come along and start just helping them, just brick by brick, building those academies up that will be there, a decade or two later. And so, as you might imagine, you can't do that straight away, but there's always a few classic areas that people want to address first or very early on. One is sales and business development, and another one is leadership. And so you touched on two of those that are germane to your ordinary practice. So the classic people that we sort of see curious about coaching, wanting to know how it works, curious to give it a try, attempting it, getting down to the library or Amazon, I'd say are between the age of about 30 and 45.
Yeah.
They have their first few direct reports, or they're within a few years of their first few direct reports.
Yeah.
And they can kind of feel the trepidation of feeling like, well, there's some mystery about these human beings that I am unable to crack. And so I need some further form of dark arts in order to understand who these creatures are and what to do with their strange motivations and so on. So if we assume that that's the reader, any kind of other ideas,
beautiful.
The idea of self-application I thought was quite simple, but wise. Any other words for them?
Yeah, great. That demographic really makes sense, because you're also shifting outside of yourself. You're not running as an individual contributor. You're now thinking about others and impact. So yeah, I really get that demographic. So any other?
I'll give you a very like almost an avatar style example, since that sort of had broad demographic qualities to it. Think a lawyer, right? A lawyer spends the first 4-6 years of their career smashing out the paperwork, right? And just like nailing it and learning the small refinements on like intellectual property law in the way that it's worded in their client statements or whatever, all this stuff. And then so they go from a junior associate to senior associate, and then someday somebody comes along and is like, you're welcome to junior partner or salary partner, whatever. You've made a transition. On that day, two things start to define who they are. One is taking care of personnel, and the other one is bringing in money. It's like you've had exactly no experience with either of these two things up till now, other than you've worked on something else somebody else sold, or you've been somebody managed by someone else. But that's the demographic right there. It's like, wow, suddenly the mantle is on me, and coaching seems like it must be something I should do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly the experience of what we find, is that shift into leadership of people, leadership of an organization, is where people go, hang on, the old winning formula of work hard, grind, get my targets, hit those KPIs, that don't work anymore. In fact, if I try that with people, what tends to happen is people try and push their philosophy onto other. And as you say, human beings are mysterious and motivations are different. So the moment you try and push your success formula onto another, it can backfire quite quickly unless you found the perfect kind of mirror of you, which you may find, but very rarely. So you need to shift to go, okay, that formula's got to now change. And it's linked to where we started around vertical development and adult development. It's less about me and how do I now broaden my perspective to think about to think about business. And that's one of the things that happens in adult development, is you move from kind of a little bit more me-centered to actually other-centered and broader business-centered. And that continues, so when you go to, a senior leader to an executive, your areas of consideration become political. They become, around impact in society. So suddenly, those things around people and developing sales shift to, oh my God, I've got to have conversations on, with political leaders and influence the agenda politically, or I've got to think about societal impact or planetary impact, because our customers are not going to buy our products unless we think sustainably. So that changed the broadened perspective. And to come back to your question then, so what would my advice to this demographic be? Is probably one would be, the key thing I've seen succeed is if you can get that, there's a lot of work done on this, and it links to the B mindset, is the growth mindset or the learning mindset. Because I think if you can cotton on to, there isn't an end goal, that, okay, now I can master coaching, or now I can master how to do great sales. You're always going to learn. And if you've got a great learning mindset, learning about yourself and then applying that learning to others, I think that's a great mindset to have, to help you to continue to just meet how life goes up, as you move through different levels of seniority. And then whatever those transitions are through those stages of development, you can enjoy them, you can have fun doing them, as opposed to think, okay, once I've got this, everything's going to be great. It doesn't, because there'll be a new set at every stage of development. So it's probably one thing. And for me, then my advice to that group is go to organizations which have a learning culture, a learning organization, and people like Senge, who, if you want to read up Peter Senge, that talk about, the organizations of the
Fifth
future.
discipline guy.
Yeah, fifth discipline guy. Learning organizations are the ones that are going to succeed. And of course, we see that because the amount of change happening is like, change is now normal. And, it's not rare to have 3 months of a new change and transformation strategy change again, and, to become completely different. So we need to adapt and be in that space of agile learning. So find an organization that supports your learning and provides mentorship, or whether it's coaching or mentorship, or leaders who really support development. You will then move through that challenge of becoming great at sales or people development faster because of that. And if you haven't got that support, it tends to be a bit more trickier because you're kind of rowing on your own rather than with a team. So probably my 2 bits of advice, which connects to the resignation. The great resignation is people also looking for organization where they can thrive. And if you look at the research now, even millennials, money is now 4th or 5th down the list. It is about a meaningful organization, a place where I can learn and grow. And they seem to be priority. So hold true to that. And then with coaching, for me, it's one of the most powerful learning tools we have, because it creates that psychological safety where learning happens. And think about even child development. If you imagine, if I connect back to self-talk briefly, I don't know, we're hitting time, so I'll just say this briefly. If you imagine,
go ahead.
I'm okay to go over as well. Okay. But if you imagine a child learning to walk, when they fall, they laugh. Parents go, "Oh, well done, you did 1 step." Unfortunately, as we grow up, we develop a self-talk, and maybe our education system does this as well, start to say, "You failed," and suddenly the child would stop learning. So if we can get back to that fun, that adaptive, hey, when I fall, it's because I'm learning a particular muscle that needs to grow. So if we can adapt that learning mindset, and of course have the parents or the organization that creates the learning culture, you're more likely to learn to walk really quickly, and then run, and then sprint, etc. So yeah, that would be my kind of leaving thought around this.
I have now I have just a stack of extra topics I want to pick up with you. If you don't mind, we're gonna have to wait either until you publish your next book or just for a round 2 in a couple of weeks, because I really like to talk about the vertical concept at least. And then I think 1 or 2 of the things that you were just touching on there, and maybe a double click into self-talk. So should we call this chapter 1?
Chapter 1, I'd love it. Yeah, I'm very excited about vertical development, Kevin, because I think it is huge right now, and it's hitting that tipping point where it's going to become quite well known. So yeah, it'd be lovely to help your listeners to get inside it, at least from one person's perspective. So yeah, chapter 1, and let's see what happens next.
Karim, people are going to want to look the book up, look you up, look up BTS and so forth. Let me give you the last word and just kind of direct folks wherever they can find those things.
The book you can get from Amazon all over the world, and it's been translated as well. I don't know how many languages, and there's also an audio. So Amazon has all of those, the 4 greatest coaching conversations. BTS.com, if you want to look up BTS, and it'll give you the whole array of what we get up to. And then look up me, Karim Hirani, look it up, and pop me a connection on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with audiences through LinkedIn. So that's a place you can find out more about me and what I'm saying in the world.
Super. I'll let for the Audible lovers in the crowd, I'll let them know when you check out the book on Amazon, it isn't immediately obvious that it's on Audible. It says it's on audio CD. So you got to go to the Audible website, but it's there.
Okay.
It's
Thank you.
Well narrated.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Okay. Karim, thanks very much. That's great. So glad we got in touch with you.
Pleasure.
And we'll keep in close touch from here. We'll talk again
lovely,
soon.
Kevin. Nice to talk to you as well. Thanks.
Okay. Be well. Bye.
Bye. Bye.